Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey, Lee, and Carrie.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey.
Way to be enthused.
Hey!
You can find us online at justformorefix.com or on Twitter at justformorefix. If you like us, you can support us at patreon.com and head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you find us and give us a rating and a review. In this episode, we're going to have the return of Kyle Chenier. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
Grisby from the Strange and Unusual podcast, a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to now. The opinions expressed are those of each individual host. Check out all the other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
You guys are about to listen to our interview with Kyle Chenier. We had a great time with this one, but just want to let you know that we recorded this one remotely, so there are a few audio glitches in it. Without any further ado, here is the return of Kyle Chenier.
Sounds like a cheesy sequel. The Return of Kyle Chenier.
The return.
He's like Michael Myers or something.
It's the returning.
Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. One quick announcement before we get things rolling today. If you are in the Terre Haute area, on May 12th from 1 to 5 o'clock, we are going to be doing some indie game days at our local game store, Game, on 7th Street in Terre Haute. So if you're in the area and want to come hang out with us and check out some indie games that we're going to run for you guys, come on in and check us out. Right on. So today we are here sitting down again with award-winning game designer Kyle Chenier. He's decided to come back to us because we are awesome. I don't know, question mark.
Oh, yeah, totally. Totally why I'm back.
Right on. For those of you that haven't listened to the previous episode, first off, shame on you. Second off, Kyle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Kyle Chenier. I am a independent elf game designer from Canada. I wrote and laid out and drew maps for an adventure called Blood in the Chocolate, which won gold at the 2017 Ennies last year. And right now I'm working on a book that is coming out hopefully very soon. It's called Weird on the Waves.
So we just finished our actual play of Horrors of Pig Island, which is going to be included in the Weird on the Waves supplement that should be coming out this summer. And we had a great time, so look for that episode. That should be dropping within a couple weeks here. Just sort of depends on how the editing schedule goes, but that should be coming out to you guys very quickly. So what is Weird on the Waves?
Weird on the Waves is a wave crawl setting and toolkit that you can use for basically any sort of old school elf game that you like. It's intended for Lamentations of the Flame Princess, but it works just as well with like Dungeon Crawl Classic, Swords and Wizardry. It's actually broad enough that you can also use it with later editions of D&D, like 5th edition. And it's basically a big old 17th century Caribbean sort of pirate setting that I'm writing. Because it's intended for Lamentations of the Flame Princess, it's written with an assumed setting of 1655 and the Caribbean Sea, which includes Cuba and, at the time, Hispaniola, the island of Tortuga, and a number of other sort of small islands within there.
That's like right at the beginning age of the golden age of pirates or whatever, right?
Yeah, basically right before a lot of the really big pirates began to take hold. Like buccaneers and privateers are absolutely a thing. But this sort of tremendous threat of piracy has not quite happened yet. And it's the idea that the outcome of this sort of setting and series of adventures is that the player characters are the ones that help kind of kick that off.
This is a pretty stark contrast to Blood in the Chocolate. In terms of tones, was there a reason why, or just did you want to try something different, or kind of like where did it come from?
I definitely wanted to try something different, and I wanted to make a setting that has been done a lot by a variety of different publishers, but that I've never really been satisfied with other people's entries. Like lots of people do sort of pirate D&D, and it's good and it's fun, and you can have some really good times with pirate-themed D&D, but every time I played in one of those games, it was always sort of the same thing because it's very much sort of a pastiche of all the sort of pirate tropes. Like you get on a ship and there's like ridiculous sort of shantytown pirate island that is basically the Pirates of the Caribbean ride from Disneyland. It's still a good time, but once you're on the ship, there could be a kraken, and oh no, it's skeleton pirates, and it's always sort of the same thing over and over again. So I wanted to make something that took a lot of those elements, but did something a lot more unique and a lot weirder. Something that I felt would fit better in with Lamentations of the Flame Princess.
Right. So in terms of weirdness, can you are there any elements of that you could point to in the game that sort of draw that out?
Absolutely. A big thing that sets Weird on the Waves apart is its sort of alternate history setting. So it's set in the Caribbean in 1655. So rather than sort of jam pirate stuff into sort of traditional fantasy, the way that a lot of other pirate games do it, like you've got the real world and all of the things that come out of it. But on top of that, there is also this strange sort of Bermuda Triangle style patch of the Caribbean Sea where just a lot of strange things are coming out of it. And Lamentation of the Flame Princess trades a lot on sort of Lovecraftian horror and otherworldly sort of Cthulhu-like creatures. This is similar, but a little bit askew from that. There's not a tremendous amount of like tentacles and squid monster things going on here. But instead, one of the conceits of it is that this patch of the ocean is a living creature.
Oh, right on.
Like the same way that we would think of like a single-celled organism is a sort of a membrane around fluid and sort of small bits of the cell, like the mitochondria and the, oh God, my 10th grade biology is totally failing me. What other parts of the cell are there?
Go with ribosomes. Yay, ribosomes.
Yes. Nucleus.
The Golgi apparatus.
Oh, man. It's taking me back. It assumes that the ocean is sort of a living entity. And the same way that sort of Patrick Stewart and Scrap Princess made Veins of the Earth. And it imagined the Earth itself as this terribly ancient thing who's similar to other living things on Earth. It's just terribly weird. And because it's so old, it's become even stranger over the millennia. I wanted to try and do what Patrick Stewart and Scrap Princess did for underground stuff. I want to do the same thing, but kind of for the ocean.
Well, the Veins of the Earth book is just awesome. It completely changed the way that I sort of see underground gaming. Lots of awesome inspiration there. So that's really cool to sort of push towards that in a unique way. Because I totally agree that a lot of the like maritime style games or whatever, they all sort of fit in the same mold, more or less. Yeah. That sort of Pirates of the Caribbean. I don't know if that's a fault or a feature. It's kind of both, I guess, but
It's definitely a feature. Like you play that kind of game when like that's what you want. But I always feel like the shelf life of them is a little shorter because like once you've done the 5 or 6, again, it's like taking the trip at Disneyland and everything. You go on Pirates of the Caribbean. Once you've seen all of those major sites and everything, you've gone through Tortuga and you've seen the pirates and there's the guys trapped in the jail cell trying to get the dog's attention. Like it's all good and you have fun, but then it's done.
Right.
And it's like, well, we had some pirate times. Back to traditional fantasy things. We've had our fun on the sea. With Weird on the Waves, I want to set up something that has, hopefully, a little bit more staying power. Because it offers like a lot more weird stuff.
So I have a question about it. Is Weird on the Waves like the setting and the horrors of Pig Island just like one example scenario that's in it? Or is it a collection of scenarios?
Weird on the Waves is a setting book.
That's how I understood it.
Yeah. Right now, it has the basic version, has the adventure that you guys played, The Horrors of Pig Island. Originally, it was called, what was it called? It was originally called Marooned Among the Dead. But the more I play tested it, the more I was like, the original adventure was kind of boring. Oh, look at this weird, interesting pig magic stuff that's based vaguely on Greek myth and stuff.
Right.
Let's take a bunch of that and put it into pirate times. And it's made an adventure that's much more satisfying to me as a designer. The expanded version of Weird on the Waves also comes with another adventure, which I believe is called Deep in the Belly. It is a dungeon crawl inside the belly of a giant whale.
Oh, that is so cool.
I saw the uber whale on the table of contents, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I wonder, maybe made me wonder a little Jonah the whale.
So what's hopefully in the book proper, and some of this is subject to change as more testing gets done. Like I'm hoping not to cut a lot of it because I know that a lot of people have pre-ordered it already and it's the things that they want. There's a guide to the setting, which basically explains a lot of the historical stuff, so you have some good context and you have interesting information to draw on to build your adventures. There is a brand new class for Lamentations of the Flame Princess called the Mermaid. It's basically what it sounds like. You get to play a mermaid. There are varying different kinds of mermaids that you can be, which basically amount to like, where are your fish parts? Because there's a classic mermaid, but then there's also the reverse mermaid where the fish parts are on
Fish
top.
on top.
So like from the torso up is fish, and you have human.
Is that Family Guy that has that fish on top joke?
There's also the split mermaid, which means bisected down the middle, half of your body is sort of fish parts and the other half is human. There's the secret mermaid or the hidden mermaid, where you appear human, except for maybe a few small details, but your insides are all fish parts, which creates some weird problems.
We call that the Kevin Costner mermaid.
Yeah, that exists in it too. I don't know if it's called the Kevin Costner mermaid. I might
Right on. So on there, I saw it had D100 roll for the mermaid. So did it come about in the same way that I don't know if the Amazon and the Witch are the first ones to do it for Lamentations?
So the first ones to do a random D100 generate like advancement. The first one published by Lamentations of the Flame Princess was the Alice in A Red and Pleasant Land.
Oh, okay. I forgot about that one. Yeah.
So that style of character advancement is one that I know Zach Smith, who wrote A Red and Pleasant Land and also Frostbitten and Mutilated, likes. Also Jeff Reintz, who wrote Broodmother Sky Fortress for LOTFP. In his weekly Flail Snails game that I've gotten to play in a bunch, he has a whole bunch of random advancement D&D classes. Like he has a random advancement version of the fighter and the magic user and the elf and the halfling. And they all kind of interplay into each other. Like if you advance a certain amount of times as a halfling, there's a random chance you might be able to advance in magic user as well. So you get some spells. It basically ensures that you're getting a lot of more specific and interesting stuff going on with your character, but it's random as opposed to later editions where you're choosing feats and you have to sift through a lot of rules to figure out, okay, what feats do I need?
Right.
How do I level up these skills? It basically allows you to have that kind of weird little minutia, but you don't have to worry about like sifting through a huge whole rule book to find exactly what you want or need.
When you started this whole project, is there any particular sources of inspiration that you had, or have you been into like nautical stuff before, or?
Actually, no. I hadn't actually been into a lot of like pirate stuff with role-playing games. Like I read through a few pirate setting stuff. Like I've read bits and pieces of Fraud God Games' book, The Razor Coast, and it's pretty good. But I mean, I like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies pretty good, and I had definitely seen a lot of Pirates media. I read Treasure Island as a kid, but the thing that actually sort of pushed it forward for me as something I wanted to do was because it got to a point around the holidays where I was broke. There had been a banking error with my bank and I had lost like a big portion of my savings. And suddenly I didn't have money to buy Christmas presents for my family and for my partners. And it was a really big setback for me. And I was like, oh, shoot, I need to make a bunch of money very fast. Okay. Well, I'm only good at a few things. I can definitely make role-playing game books, and I can do them reasonably fast. Shoot, okay, what can I put up for pre-order to get people excited? What's something that doesn't really exist for Lamentations of the Flame Princess right now that I know people would probably want? Oh, shit, a pirate book. Yeah, no, that's tons of fun, and it's been, like, kind of a struggle to have really good mechanics for sailing, and, like, because that's the thing, when you play D&D and you play pirate games, the rules for operating a pirate ship and sailing across the sea are either very simplistic or are ridiculously complicated to the point where it's like you need spreadsheets and you need a bunch of other stuff to figure out exactly how sailing works. Like it's kind of the same thing with a lot of other systems with like spaceships. So I wanted something that was more comprehensive than nothing, but also simpler than like the most complicated systems, so that it still felt approachable to people.
Right on. So like necessity being the mother of invention, essentially.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, because I figured it was a need that I hadn't seen filled yet.
Right on.
And I figured now that I've got a fire under me and I really need to hustle on this, I might as well do that.
So we saw in the actual play that you added the skills luck and maritime to kind of accommodate that. Are there any other kind of significant rules changes that help make that transition?
There are a few new rules that I've put in. Let me see what I've got added. In terms of character creation, I've added the 2 new skills, luck and maritime. Maritime is basically the skill that you use for sailing, for charting courses on the water. Basically because there wasn't, it felt weird to use like bushcraft.
Right.
Or, or a lot of the other skills that are currently in LOTFP at the moment. I was like, there should be like a dedicated sailing skill. But it needed to be broader than just sailing ships. It needed to be able to be used for other things as well. So I was like, maritime. That works. And luck I put in because more and more I waffled on the idea of straight up including like an advantage-disadvantage system, what's in 5th edition, because I really love that rule set. Uh-huh. But the more I tested it, the more I found like it doesn't really feel all that good with LOTFP because it makes things a little bit too easy. Mm-hmm. So then I figured you could have a skill that was luck, that you just have a number of rerolls per session. And from there, like pirate and buccaneer type characters are a little more skill based, so everybody gets a few more skill points off the bat.
Right.
I like the luck thing with the sailors anyway, because in all the old stories, they're very superstitious and there's a very luck based kind of climate and everything. So it works with that.
I'm glad you think it fits well.
Are you doing any art for this, or do you have somebody else that's doing that?
So I'm doing, except for the editing, I'm doing everything in this book.
Awesome.
All the art, all the layout, all the other stuff. The art is going to be the writing is almost done. There are still a few mechanics and still a few like mapping techniques that I need to make sure are properly tested before everything's ready for layout. But yeah, the art is probably going to be the last thing that happens, and it's all going to be stuff that I've done. If it gets to the point where it starts slipping past another deadline, I might reach out to more artists. But for the time being, I think I'm going to do all the art.
Is this one of your largest undertakings as a designer by yourself?
Oh, this is the single largest book that I've done. I would say it's about, in total, with the expanded edition that people can pay a bit extra for, it's going to be bigger than the biggest book I wrote. The biggest book I wrote was The Hell House Beckons, which was one of my first original things. It's like 80 pages. And it's this big toolkit and adventure and collection of NPCs and new rules for running haunted houses. It's one big adventure proper and a whole bunch of characters to go along with it, but it also has completely new mechanics for how ghosts work. And if you die in the adventure, you can come back as a ghost and explore this sort of parallel ghost world. So I had a whole bunch of new mechanics for that. Weird on the Waves is similar in scope, but owing to the fact that it has to cover like an entire region of ocean as well as a number of islands. It's the biggest thing I've ever worked on.
Is there anything particular? I mean, I realize every time you take on a new project, you sort of learn new things in that along the way. But is there anything specific in terms of taking on a larger project that you found that you didn't realize?
So most other projects that I've worked on are ones that I have had a certain amount of familiarity with the things that inspire it. Again, with Blood and the Chocolate, I'm low-key obsessed with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And on top of that, the cultivation of cocoa and chocolate and that whole sort of production scale thing, like I knew a lot about that as well. So the research for that book came pretty easily. Same with The Hell House Beckons. I love haunting movies. They have been one of my favorite aspects of horror for forever. This shouldn't be too hard. Ditto for like a few other adventures I've written. Weird on the Waves is the book that I've had to like learn a bunch of brand new stuff because I did not know anything about 17th century piracy. I knew a little bit about the golden age of piracy, but like not much. Like, I had to buy a whole bunch of research materials. I picked up a really, really good book by David Cordingley, Under the Black Flag.
That's a good book.
That was the primary thing I used for research. From there was also a lot of other collections of accounts of pirating stories from then, the rise of buccaneers and where that term comes from. I had to learn a lot about just the history and the politics at the time. And beyond that, I've also had to learn a lot about how actual ships work.
Yeah.
And how sailing works. The sailing system that I have in place currently, originally I had written 12 different types of ships of varying size class, and they all had different stats and they all had different ways of interacting with them and different crew complements. And the more I tested that, I was like, this is too many. I can collapse these into like 5 kinds of ships based on size. And from there, the differences between a sloop, a cutter, and
Schooner.
A bunch of other ships that are around that size compared to things like brigs and basically every other class of ship that is smaller than a trimere or a galleon. In gameplay, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Like in gameplay, like these were differences that like they didn't feel impactful enough. So I was like, I can simplify it a little bit. These ships will still exist and they will still like have small differentiations, but I can simplify it down to just 5 size classes. That way it's a little simpler and a little easier for referees to keep track of.
Do you have anything set up where you can do like a full scale naval battle, but like multiple ships involved together?
Absolutely. The way that the rules work is that every sea vessel has the equivalent of a D&D character's 6 ability scores.
Okay.
And from those, they also have modifiers. And when you have a crew and you're doing things like every turn that you take on the waves as you're like doing things, every character has an action that they can do on that ship. Like if you have enough cannons and everyone just wants to use cannons, you can spend your entire turn, everyone makes an attack with these cannons. Likewise, if everyone wants to do something a little bit different, this all happens simultaneously. So maybe someone steers the ship a certain way, so you've added this amount of maneuverability. Meanwhile, some other people are firing cannons. Another person is up in the crow's nest working navigation, being like, move that way, there's a wave ahead. So there's a whole bunch of things happening at once. And from what I've tested 4 ships at once, all firing on each other and all doing different things. And it hasn't broken yet. More ships than that? I don't know if it could handle more than that, but we'll see.
Right on.
Okay, very cool.
So I really liked your maps in Blood in the Chocolate. They're whimsical, but they provide zoom in and stuff. Do you have I assume there's going to be a lot of maps in Weird on the Waves. Is it that whole area of the Caribbean and zoom ins of different islands?
So right now the large scale map of where you're exploring it's this portion of the Caribbean Sea where in one corner you have Cuba. In the other corner, in the bottom corner, you have Hispaniola. In the upper left, you have a collection of other small islands. And then towards the right, there's Empty Sea, which saying, like, if you keep going this way, you'll hit the Florida Keys and you'll eventually hit Florida. And then in between there are a bunch of small little islands. And then there's also Tortuga. Tortuga is the only one that is really filled in as a big island settlement. Everything else is sort of like you have enough information to play there, but they're not completely filled in.
Cool. Lots of random charts then?
Oh, yeah. The expanded version has a random table for most other things that happen on the water.
Awesome.
There's also a new mapping system because it's a big hex map, but the Caribbean Sea is very big.
Right.
So there's a new die drop table mapping system where for every big hex of this portion of the ocean, it's divided up into, I believe, 10 smaller hexes. And for each hex that you want a bunch of stuff to happen in, you drop a handful of dice on the table, and it generates other kinds of ships that are currently on the water. It generates possible small islands and little atolls. It also generates what sort of wildlife is around, like schools of fish, sea monsters, random encounters and things.
The last time we talked, you mentioned you encouraged future people that play games to design more often, and then today you were talking a lot about people that play tested. So when we were actually playing, you talked about like previous play tests. How do you find people to play test with? How does that process start?
Oh man, so right now I have basically 2 answers to this. The number 1 answer is I have anyone that is sort of close to me to play tested, like family, friends, people that I know through Google+, basically people in the sort of gaming communities that I hang out with. People who I run online games for, basically anyone who I can get that I'm like close with, I would feel comfortable sort of like, hey, do you want to play a game this weekend? It's the new one that I'm making. And thankfully I have close enough friends that they're down to try that stuff. On the other hand, I also attended a convention a couple years ago called Metatopia. It's out in New Jersey, and it is an entire convention for game designers that is based around playtesting. Everyone brings their new games, and then you spend 2 days just everyone playtesting each other's games.
Really cool.
I tested my original sort of fantasy heartbreaker game, Snow Witch Shield Maiden, at the time, and I also tested Blood in the Chocolate. Blood in the Chocolate was mostly done at that point, but I still got some extra. I was able to add some like last minute notes to some things that I learned.
So with all the playtesting and effort that goes into designing Blood in the Chocolate and Weird on the Waves, do you actually have time to just relax and play regular tabletop RPGs that don't involve the products you're working on?
I actually do. every so often, not nearly as much as I would like, but I do have time to play games. I play in my partner Arella's Curse of Strahd game. Listeners, if you are not following her Curse of Strahd stuff, she is one of the best dungeon masters to run that game. Check out a blog called bardicchef.tumblr.com. She has a lot of notes for it there. It's such a good game. Also, I run my version of Curse of Strahd for her. We have a one-on-one game. It's called 5 Courses of Strahd. It's basically, what if you took Ravenloft and mixed it with sort of like Iron Chef, and then mixed that with Hannibal?
I saw when you were pitching that initially on your Tumblr, and I was like, "What in the world is happening right now?" So I was really.
So her character is a chef, and she's also a native of Barovia, the land which Ravenloft takes place in. And this adventure is her basically returning to Barovia, and instead of traditional combat, it's a lot of cooking challenges and a variety of other sort of culinary-based encounters. And it's also a lot of one-on-one role-playing and NPC interaction and mystery and other stuff. And yeah, it's gone really, really well. And it's a really different way of playing D&D.
Right.
It's still, that's the thing. Even though combat has been stripped out, it's still super dangerous. And it's still really tense.
That's fun. I saw some posting something about a giant glob of maple syrup in Canada. Can you tell me? Can you tell me more about that?
A couple months back, me and another local Lamentations of Flame Princess designer, Zarkov Kowalski. He's a fellow Canadian. He's from Ottawa. He wrote Scenic Dunsmith, which is one of those
awesome.
killer or LOTFB adventures. Like, it's really good.
Is that the one that has the cards?
Yes.
It's got a really cool die drop thing in there that you mentioned, like similar.
Yeah. The cool thing about Scenic Dunsmith is that, like, you use a deck of playing cards and a piece of paper, and through a combination of die drops and playing card draws, you generate an entire little village and the weird stuff that's going on there and which characters are present. It's really fun and it's really interesting. And it's also twisted as hell. So him and I have sort of a friendly rivalry going on. When I first published The Hell House Beckons, and I had called it the best haunted house toolkit around, or I'd said something like it's the best. And around the same time, Zarkov published his haunted house book. We've basically coincided, like, published very similar products around the same time a couple of times now. So he came to me and said, you know what, we should just settle this once and for all. Who's the better writer? Let's have a 24-hour writing competition. And it'll be Canadian themed. We'll theme it around. We asked people online, what should we theme it around? And I think someone said maple syrup. And I was like, I can write that. I can absolutely do that. Yeah, let's do that. In the span of 24 hours, we each wrote LOTFP adventures set in Canada in that time period based around maple syrup. The one that I wrote is called Sugar Shack Slaughter. It is it's basically the Blob. It's what if the Blob, but if it was made out of boiling hot maple syrup and it was slowly creeping its way to destroy Quebec City. There's also some, like, weird native magic going on. So there's, like, this hollowed out tree dungeon that you have to go down. And there are, like, horribly mutilated sort of maple syrup zombies. And not just human zombies, but, like, beaver zombies, caribou zombies.
It's got to be Canadian, right?
Oh, yeah. And the entire thing is sort of centered around terrible mishaps that have happened in the northern Quebec sugar bush community. So people where they're making maple syrup. Because for a while in that time period, like, that was a primary source of sugar. Getting cane sugar from the islands and everything is way too cost prohibitive. But the harvest of maple sugar was huge then.
According to the introduction, he won.
So, yeah, technically mine was like a few minutes late because I was having internet connections. Like, it was thunderstorming out and my power kept going out. So he technically won by default, which sucks. Also, he was the project manager behind this, so he was the one that helped organizing and get Dyson logos to do additional maps. That's the thing. He used existing Dyson logos maps. I made all my maps from scratch, which again ate up time.
Well, I noticed he wrote the introduction as well.
No, that's the thing. So both adventures have been bundled together and it's called The Scenario from Ontario, which I came up with.
It's wonderful.
And it's these two really funky adventures sort of put together that you can get on RPG Now and Drive-Thru RPG. And they're compatible with, again, most sort of old school games. And I like to think they're pretty cool.
It sounds like a lot of fun.
They provide a lot of interesting new monsters and new maps and new setups and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can tell you I've never, ever played a maple syrup zombie beaver before.
If you liked Blood and the Chocolate, Sugar Shack Slaughter has a very similar vibe and a very similar feel.
Right on. I saw it. Looked super fun to me. I like certain things. I just like it's just fun, lack of a better word. I don't know if there is a better one, but
that's my jam. Like, that's why I make role-playing game adventures the way that I do. Like, I try to take an interesting spin on either an existing idea, or I try to mash up. It's usually, I take a lot of inspiration from movies, and I take a lot of inspiration from history. So I often try to mash up elements of different horror movies with some kind of event from history of, if these other elements were in play, what if things went a little differently in history? And like mash those two things together, and that's a Lamentations adventure. And yeah, I try to keep things really colorful and really, I don't know if unique is the right word. Something where they feel definitely sort of different from like the sort of dour or grim or gritty stuff that is usually on offer with a lot of horror or like dark fantasy kinds of stuff.
Well, it's fun because I think something like those high notes and low notes are sort of what differentiate the things between the two. So then if you have a couple adventures that are like very dour and grim and brutal, it's sort of nice to be able to still have the weirdness and horror, but in a different vein. It sort of pushes different buttons, and then you can kind of pivot back and go back to the grimness and horror, if that's what you're...
Absolutely. Well, it's in the way that I write stuff, like, it's nice to have some levity there. And I'm also like, I have difficulty writing like super tonally consistent stuff, because every instance of Dungeons and Dragons that I've ever played has never really been tonally consistent.
Right.
The few instances where it has been, it's felt boring to me.
Right.
Because it felt like we were sort of chained by the restraints of the setting, or the restraints of the implied tone of the adventure or the setting.
Well, I think sometimes
things can be silly and scary and weird.
I think sometimes some things take themselves almost too seriously, and it sort of starts to detract from having just good old fun.
Well, last time we talked, you mentioned being kind of into manga and enjoying those cartoons, and there's something that can have a serious plot and also throw in these just ridiculous things just for the fun of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another thing. Like, a lot of my storytelling sensibilities do come from manga and anime, where again, like, there are a lot of big tonal shifts where things can be very lighthearted at one point, and then like on a dime pivot to soul-crushingly bleak or like really mentally twisted. And it's like, this was supposed to be a happy-go-lucky show about fighting robots. Oh god, now we're delving into the human psyche and getting into some dark stuff.
Right.
Anime does that all the time.
They have a cool thing with kind of mashing up two different style genres and still staying true to both and making their own thing at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah. I made a comment of this online a little while ago, because the things that inspire me are, especially about history and about like fantasy stuff, I'm not super interested in the history of conflicts, like of wars or of like prominent people. Again, I'll say we're like weird outliers. The things that kind of turn my crank are like the innovations in history. Like, when did this new medicine or this new product or this new food or this new thing that we take for granted today, how did that first happen? And the more you read about it, the more you find like, oh, that was a weird process to get us there. What it was in its original form is ridiculous and strange. Even going back to like the 18th century and like, oh yeah, like laudanum. Laudanum was what? Morphine mixed with liquor and like a bunch of other things. And it's like, oh yeah, they just sold that over the counter. It's like, yeah, it's good for what ails you. Keeps you calm and even tempered. It's good for the hysteria.
Early medical technology is terrifying. It's just, it's unbelievable that we have survived this long, to be honest.
Yeah. And those are the kinds of things that catch my interest. And it's also the stuff that is least examined in fantasy. One thing that that it bothered me that it was never commented upon was the idea of healing potions. They seem to be everywhere, but there's no industry or there's no market around that? Why is there no bottling factory for healing potions at that point when clearly it is the most useful substance in the world?
It's laudanum?
It's one of those weird conceits with a lot of fantasy games where if there is magical healing, it sort of takes death off the table as a permanent thing in a lot of ways. And like I said, it just doesn't ever kind of go beyond a write-up of a spell on a page and doesn't go anything beyond that.
Yeah. Well, because like a lot of it's the conceit of a game. And sometimes the implications of, or like the conceits of a game have implications on the world that aren't really examined because they're very gamey stuff. Like spells do that. Because spells are very sort of purpose-driven to solve game tasks.
Right.
Like Charm Person is something like that. And we don't really think about how like skeevy and weird and like terrible the spell Charm Person really is. Because it's meant to be like, it solves a problem. It breaks the rules in a very specific way when you need them to be broken. And I don't know, I like to think about that kind of stuff, I guess. And I like to be able to write fantasy adventures for D&D type games that examine them just even just a little bit more. Because I think that there's a lot of narrative potential there, I guess.
Well, and it's a hugely unexplored area in nearly every single one of those cases.
So I noticed in this Weird on the Waves, you have yet another female supervillain in the adventure that you're running. So do you have inspiration for that character? Where did you kind of pull all of that from?
The character from The Horrors of Pig Island, her name is...
Circe
I have it
something.
written down somewhere. Yeah, her first name is Circe, which is very clearly taken from Greek mythology, the tale of it's Circe and Odysseus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was actually commenting on it as the game went on.
No, that's absolutely the primary inspiration for that. I've written a bunch for it, but it still needs to be edited. So we'll see how much actually ends up in the final product. But yeah, I had this character who was a galley slave on a Spanish mercantile vessel. Because one thing I've learned through a lot of research and everything that a lot of pirate media tends to gloss over is the fact that like slavery was absolutely a thing. And slaves were essentially a trade good.
It's sort of what makes the golden age of piracy work, is that entire economy.
And we've romanticized pirates to the point where it's like, oh, pirates didn't have slaves. No, they absolutely did. And in my attempt with Weird on the Waves is to sort of say, like, well, because it's so early in that era, like, if you want to play a bunch of slave-freeing iconoclasts, do that. Because it's really interesting, and it sets up a lot of really interesting narrative things that you can do there. But Circe was a galley slave. The ship that she was on, this Spanish merchant vessel, crashed into this island. And this island is super cursed. So all of the Spanish naval officers and all these merchants and everything, they all stumble up with the rest of their crew and the rest of their slaves. And slowly but surely, all the higher-ups get turned into pigs. And the rest of the slaves haven't turned yet. Sure, we rule this island now. Let's eat the people that owned us. Let's do that. And they do. And it works well for a while. But then that magic continues to seep in, and slowly but surely the rest of them begin to transform as well. Circe is the only magic user on that boat. She's the only one that has any experience in using magic. Where that magic comes from is still somewhat undecided in the rules of it, but like it is because of that she is the only person of that original crew that doesn't turn into a pig. And through that, she's like, I'm sort of the god of this island now. Every time people go to come here, and I think I'm rescued, they've turned into pigs before we can leave. Like, I can't sail a ship on my own, and now I just have this steady supply of food. I might as well just rule this place.
Seems legit.
And in doing that, she experiments a little bit, and she casts spells, and she discovers, I can essentially take control of some of these people mid-transformation, so now they're just my, heinous pig slave. So there's a variety of other villainesses in Weird on the Waves proper.
Awesome. I also liked how you named the boat Elizabeth's Blushing Bride. It was kind of just like a subtle inclusivity thing there that was nice.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that I actually have in the introduction rules. And I had them in Sugar Shack Slaughter as well. They said that changes have been made to the historical context of the adventure to greater create sort of sexual, racial, and cultural diversity in here, because even though this is a historical adventure, to me, at least, it's much more interesting to play that with a greater sort of cast of characters than what would have been otherwise precluded by leaning into the history, I guess.
Well, even along with that, there's always outliers. So like people like Anne Bonny and all these pirates. And my thought has always been the characters that are in our game are the exceptions. You're the heroes. You're supposed to be these outliers that go out there and do things. So there's no reason to not make exceptions to however historical you want to be. There's always outliers to bring in, and there's no reason to not do that as well.
Yeah, especially with LOTFE and a lot of other games, like you're sort of supposed to be playing the iconoclastic people of that culture. And yeah, I hope it lines up like that.
I definitely felt that way. Pirates are always, the minute you say pirates, it sort of invokes that sort of
swashbuckling
outlook and mythology that all comes along with. There's a lot of assumptions and shorthand that happens the minute you start talking about pirates and privateers and what.
I like 7th Sea, but I like it, and this was totally different, and I kind of wasn't expecting that. Because it was totally different, but it was still totally awesome.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's still a lot of, or at least I hope in the final book, there's still a lot of, like, recognizable pirate-type tropes for people to latch onto. Because you don't play a pirate game without having a little bit of that.
Well, yeah. Like, treasure map.
It's not going to feel.
Right. So is it possible to do a hex crawl by sea? Is that something that's going to be included in there?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Hex crawling rules through wave crawling.
Right on.
Yeah, that absolutely exists. And there are rules for generating random encounters and generating small little islands to set your ship down and treasure maps, just the whole shebang.
And so you have a podcast now too, right?
I do. My co-host, Reynaldo Madrinian, who is the writer on a very good game that is hopefully coming out soon. The game is called Break, and it's spelled in all caps with 2 exclamation points. It's an excellent game that hopefully is coming out soon. It's very anime and very sort of 8-bit video game inspired. If you like The Legend of Zelda, Break feels very much like that.
Cool.
It's so good. But him and I have a podcast together called Ray and Kyle Can Do. It is a show about games and stuff, is how we've titled it. And to that point, like, we talk a lot about role-playing games, but we also talk about just a variety of other stuff, like different media and shows and books and just pop culture things that we're both sort of interested in.
I did listen to part of an episode, I think, about ninjas.
Oh, cool. Yes, we did. Oh, my God. We did like an hour and a half. Because ninjas are a subject that we're both super passionate about.
Well, I thought it went well with pirates.
It does, yeah. The two of them do tend to get pitted against each other. Unfortunately, I do have to say there are no ninjas in Weird on the Waves.
Well, I had a good time. Actually, the episode where you talked to him, and it was interesting to listen to you talk to Ronaldo about sort of like a game designer interviewing a game designer. And it was interesting. Most people like us, when we sit down and talk to game designers, we're on the playing side of things. So it was very interesting to listen to where your questions came from as opposed to where like mine and most other people's questions come from. So.
And Ray and I have we have similar sensibilities about games. Like, we tend to like a lot of the same stuff, but we also approach making games and writing adventure books very differently. To my detriment, I am a very crunchy designer. I like designing a lot of dice rolling mechanics and stuff. Oh, let's put in this little system here. We have to roll this dice in this specific way, and it generates this, and wouldn't that be great? And Reynaldo is much more streamlined and straightforward. Oh, you can do this over here. You only need to roll 1 die, and the rest you can either choose or roll for, and that's how you find the result. His games tend to be they tend to be simpler, but a lot more cohesive, whereas mine are kind of messy.
Well, you have all the polyhedrals. You kind of have to use them.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Break only uses one D2. It uses a D20, and that's it.
Right.
But I've played it a whole bunch. Like, I've done a bunch of playtesting with him. I don't miss any of those other dice, though. Like, he found a way to make rolling only 1 dice feel really good. And I don't say that often, because like anytime a game only uses 2 6-sided dice, like, again, any like Powered by the Apocalypse stuff, I'm like, bleh. No, I like these other dice. I want to use all of them. I don't want to use just D6s. That feels lame. No shade to any of those games. It's not my bad. But yeah, he found a way to make it really good.
So I don't know if I should mention it or not, but I did see you did a very good job of moderating the Crystal.
Oh yeah,
the Crystal fiasco, or
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things to listen to. It was just so nonsense fun.
Yeah. The Great Crystal Debate of 2018. So on my SoundCloud, which is where the podcast Ray and Kyle Can Do exists, there's also a bunch of other one-shot episodes of different shows that we've done. Like I did an interview with me and Jeff Reens talking about our games. But recently, I moderated a debate between my co-host Reynaldo Madrinian and Veins of the Earth writer and designer Patrick Stewart. Because on Google Plus, the two of them have been talking shit to each other, where Patrick basically said, "Oh, crystals are real bad. I don't like them in anything, and anyone who likes them is bad." And Reynaldo is over here. It's like, "Oh, I love crystals. Don't you talk to me or any of my glittering children ever again." The two, and these two guys both they care about each other a great deal. They like each other's work a lot, so they're decent friends. But we decided to do this debate because Patrick really doesn't like crystals in fantasy games. And Reynaldo, being the Final Fantasy nerd that he is, adores crystals. So I had the two of them get online. And they debated each other, and in doing so, I think we discovered a lot of interesting things about the inherent narrative potential of crystals, but also how they act as a potentially limiting shorthand.
Right.
It's a really interesting discussion, and a lot of really fun things came out of it. It's a little inside baseball and more than a little nerdy, but
I loved it. I thought it was great. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it was funny
to listen to how Patrick sort of conceptualized crystals, and when you talk about the bismuth crystal and whatnot, I thought it was really awesome.
Yeah, and I know you have all kinds of spare time on your hands right now. So if you just want to have hundreds of other debates between RPG folks about random nonsense, I will listen to every one of them.
Oxford style, have a little questionnaire beforehand and afterhand, so you can even declare a winner.
Oh my God. And here's the thing. I would love to turn that into a continuing series if I can just continue to have a bunch of little RPG punch-ups about different, really specific things about fantasy.
I can start trolling all kinds of websites until somebody starts fighting if we...
Oh my God. Well, that's the thing. It's crystals is so specific. And so I would just as soon do one that's goblins, yay or nay.
Right.
But I feel like everyone is yay goblins because goblins are wonderful.
Kobolds, dogs, or dragons.
Actually, you know what? Dragons might be an interesting one because some people adore them, but especially with a lot of old school games and the OSR and the DIY D&D community, nobody uses dragons. Everyone seems to think that they're kind of lame.
Well, it's always kind of funny that it was always Dungeons and Dragons, but there was way more dungeons than there ever were dragons.
Says you.
Well, I mean, and then
I've come around completely to the opposite side of that. I used to think, oh man, I can't make dragons interesting. I got to try and redo them completely. And now I'm no, dragons are fine as is. I love them. They're great.
So where did you end up coming down, or can you reveal on the Crystal Debate?
So I will not reveal where I came down. You should listen to the episode for yourself. I will say it was close. Each side made very compelling arguments, and we all learned a little something.
Well, thank you. Weird on the Waves. This is very cool. We had an awesome time playing it and checking it out, and there's lots of fun, cool systems that we barely just touched on in our actual play. So there's lots of awesomeness there to add to your Lamentations game, or other OSR games, but Lamentations is really, that's where you should be. But
all I can say is if you've liked this episode, and especially if you like the actual play coming out, check out Weird on the Waves. It's still available for pre-order on itch.io. The base copy is $5.99, and the expanded copy, which gets you a whole bunch of additional content, an extra adventure, you get 10 new pirate NPCs, and you get a whole bunch of random tables. The base games is not thin, but there's not a lot of random tables, but the expanded one's got tons. And that one's $10.99. Pick it up, give it a pre-order and everything, because this is going to be my next big thing.
Is there anything else that you have coming out in the future to mention besides Weird on the Waves?
Not that I can announce right now. There is some other stuff in the works, but it's probably not going to be out for another year or so.
Right on.
Where can we find you, support you?
As always, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Kyle Chenier, capital K, capital C. My main blog is Dungeons and Donuts. It's on Tumblr. It's dungeonsdonuts.tumblr.com. I post art there. I post blogs about games. I post tutorials. I answer a whole bunch of people's Dungeon Master questions. I got a ton of stuff. I'm probably also on Instagram on Dungeons and Donuts. So yeah, any art that doesn't end up on the Tumblr ends up on the Instagram.
Thank you for sitting down and taking the time with us, and thank you as well for running Weird on the Ways for us. We had an awesome time. It was a lot of fun. And
Great.
Of course, thank you for playing.
I got to say, I had at least as much fun as I did playing Blood and the Chocolate. Blood and Chocolate was great, but Willy Wonka isn't my thing. But nautical stuff and ships are definitely, I love. Not necessarily just pirates, but nautical and ocean stuff I think is crazy, cool, and scary and amazing. So definitely worth checking out. It was a great time, and thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Quick Gonna Geek promo for Game Life Balance, episode 57, Big Mauler. This week, the boys have not one, but 2 featured games to discuss, and both feature insane amounts of Pepsi product placement. Because hey, who doesn't like Pepsi? Besides Andrew A.C. Yoshimura. Also, in this delightful episode, Rob has been watching more Tintin, AC got his eyes tested, and the lads discussed their 32-bit era gaming night. Spoilers, Metal Slug is a great game. But there's a quiz because, of course, there is. That's Game Life Balance, episode 57, and you can check them out on the Gonna Geek Network. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/justonemorefix or follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.